Hello, this is Dr. John Spink, Director of the Food Fraud Prevention Academy. I'm also an assistant professor at Michigan State University. And this is a 10-year look back and extended version of my presentation that was originally presented at the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences in the year 2012, and it's now 2022. And it was on addressing public health threat of counterfeit medicines, and it's a review of the Nigerian Combating Counterfeits and Substandard Medicines initiatives. And we published an academic article on this, peer-reviewed scholarly article, and this is an extended version. Actually, the concepts still apply. And it's been pretty interesting to see that in a lot of ways we're very progressive looking at this, and it's really been a template for a lot of other activities. And so we built upon that at the 10-year look back to look at the application to new projects. So what did we see back then? What's happened over time? And what are the best practices to move forward? This does, as you know, it's a video, so there's a QR code that can be shared for that. Just the abstract, that's more for the conference, not for us here. So the case study, the drivers and gaps of what was going on. So first is considering Nigeria as a country. And it was estimated that in 2050, it'll be the 11th largest economy, possibly the largest in Africa per the Economist estimate in 2012. So really growing as a country economically. Rising education and standard of living, and economic growth, and partially that's increased tax revenue on things like products that are sold, sales tax, import taxes, tariffs. Reduced smuggling. So that's a real driver. So along the way is that as the economy is growing and getting more stable, one of the things that needs to be there is more controls in the marketplace. And one of that is smuggling. Now that'll be a combination will help to increase tax revenues, but that also for something like medicines reduces the risks in the marketplace. So if a company is deciding that they want to grow and expand into Nigeria. One of the keys is if they can keep their employees healthy. And so let's say that the anti-diarrheal medicines are fraudulent in the country, and so if you opened up an office there, 10% of the employees would always be at any time would be sick based on something a very simple public health threat that in most countries would not be a problem. All of a sudden, that's a factor that goes into the investment. So as the economy is growing in these opportunities with rising education, that rising standard of living, then there is a concern about things like counterfeits. A real driver here for the Combating Counterfeit Medicines initiative was continued trusted and courageous leaders. So early on, there were a few people, Dr. Dora, the Iron Lady, I think she was called, that took the really first steps. And they had some systems in place that led them to take a real hard look at this, and then really put some systems in place that clamped down. And they've had some tremendous improvements in the safety of products. Source economies are future economic partners. So here's a big key of looking at this. So the counterfeit medicines that were entering Nigeria, and if you look just at, say, generic production around the world, India and China are two of the biggest producers of generic medicines anyway, and also then subsequently would be counterfeit medicines, just by the sheer structure of the marketplace and capacity. And a real key is when you're trying to work with source economies or work with any partner, is that people have a motivation to work with each other. And what we're looking at here is with such a high growth market in Nigeria, as well as the access to specifically petroleum products, then India and China both are looking to switch a bit from fuel, from coal as fuel to petroleum products, gas, natural gas, or your gasoline type products. That there's a lot of incentive for the countries to work together. So those are the drivers of looking at this as a problem and taking the time and having the political will and societal will to address it. Next. So the next focus is to look on at key issues, specifically getting the details like tariffs. So looking at that across the marketplace, looking at marketplace prices versus daily wages. A key that was found in some of the surveys is that from the daily wages, citizens weren't making enough money to buy an entire package of, say, anti-malaria medicines. They were buying one or two pills at a time based on how they were paid. So right there is something that adds to the challenges, that if those packages that have security features on them are being broken down, then there's a chance for fraud. I mentioned tariffs and skipped over that. So one of the things is Nigeria was having some higher tariffs or increasing tariffs because they're just having more controls in the marketplace. When you look at product arbitrage or products sold in one market or another, and you're moving product around the world, that's just a common business practice. Buy low someplace, sell high someplace else. A challenge is the tariffs between the neighboring countries. So let's say that Nigeria has a 20% tariff on some medicines coming in, but neighboring Cameroon has a 5% tariff. All of a sudden, there's a 15% price difference there, and arbitrage can happen even globally with a 5% difference in price. So right there is some factors that are kind of next to look at, because again, based on the tariffs, I'm not saying that the tariffs should be lowered in Nigeria or raised in Cameroon. It's just a factor, because there will be incentive for product to be shipped into Cameroon and then smuggled across the border. Rapid economic expansion. There's a natural lag in regulation. Absolutely. It's just the process everywhere. When new things happen, there's just some adjustments. Maybe there's over too much activity in one area and not enough in another. Over time, it does kind of balance out. But with this rapid economic expansion, things like product moving across borders. Maybe there's now triple the amount of imports coming from Cameroon in anyway for any products, legitimate products. That also then creates a bit of some issues, and that could lead to a natural lag in regulation or adjustments as well. Fraudster innovation. So along the way, if these fraudsters are making $1 million a month profit on smuggling product or cheating somehow, they're going to keep trying to work at it. So we have to continue to understand, maybe not accept saying that we think it's okay, but understand fraudster innovation. We have to constantly be moving our targets and watch the fraudsters. Continuity in programs and political leadership. So along the way, real key is that when you start on something, just to keep the programs moving and adjusting. And that will be things like being resourced and also political leadership to help focus in this area. Now with counterfeit medicines, this is something that it impacts negatively the entire marketplace. Really, the only people that are for it are smugglers and counterfeiters. Everybody else would be against and wanting to work to prevent the counterfeits, because it helps every other type of activity around the entire country. So those are all the drivers and gaps overall. So case study details. We're going to look at two parts of this. One are the results, and then the specific countermeasures that led to those results. So the scope of the project is looking at counterfeit and substandard medicines. Now, this could be product that's completely counterfeit, so it's product that's never made by that manufacturer, and it could be more substandard, where it was lower specification, lower quality. It may still have the brand name on it, but it might just be 50% of the active ingredients somehow. That also could be expired product. And there's a wide range of things that would be in that area. But they're looking for that product that has risks to the consumer. So first we looked at a number of reports, and so we were trying to get a lot of information. It's not just one source, but the World Health Organization and other reports state that from 2000 to 2006, so there's 6-7 years there, depending on when it actually starts and ends. But the key there is that they have these, for a number of years they've been active, but they reduced the amount of counterfeit and substandard medicines from 60% to 16% in the market. Two things are amazing about this. One is that there was 60% of the product in the market was counterfeit or substandard in some way, but that it got down to 16%. That's absolutely amazing. And again, we looked at a number of reports to see this. So there was a wide range of data that supported this. And so a couple things there is that, the big reduction, but at the beginning that there was concerns, even in government official hospitals, that there was a lot of this counterfeit and substandard product. And so that's a real problem, and that undermines the trust in society, in the government, in infrastructure like hospitals and healthcare. And then later, there was a NAFDAC survey that a number of sources looked at this, that reduced to 10%. So over time, from 60% down to 10% is absolutely amazing. So it's interesting to look at what was done so we can learn from best practices. Now, one thing that's key to report is that in some areas, the number of counterfeits or substandard products, it's over 90%. So that could be very rural areas, not a lot of transportation in, different things like that. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but there's already a really great progress started. And we'd like to look at what did they do when we consider countermeasures. So this project all came out of I heard the Director General of NAFDAC present at a conference, Philadelphia maybe area in the U.S. And it was amazing to see this come together because all the things they were doing for me, it aligned specifically with the theories of situational crime prevention and reducing the opportunity for crime. Now, they didn't start by thinking about situational crime prevention, but just inherently, naturally, when they looked at where these weaknesses were, they did things that surrounded the fraud opportunity, the crime triangle, and reduced it. So it was a great case study example to apply. So starting with countermeasures, one is they put authentication of the product. So right there is that if you got a tablet or a liquid or something, they could authenticate it. And they could do that in a laboratory, but then they got handheld Raman spectroscopy devices. They were about the size of a laptop almost, but they could then in the field and distribute these around to customs or other people, and they could test products. So as product comes in and it says it is product X from a company with strength and dosage Y, they could test and authenticate that. And that's a real key at the start. At the very start of all anti-counterfeiting features is detect. You need to be able to detect it before you can deter or prevent. So first was authentication. Then serialized codes on consumer packages. So let's say that you got a blister pack of some medicines. So there might be 8 or 10 or 12 in the little foil, and you pop them out. So on that package, there was a scratch off area where you could scratch off and see a code. And these were serialized codes. So each package had a unique code. And there was a master system that then controlled these and distributed them. They weren't sequential like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They were random. So it would be impossibly difficult for you to guess. When you saw one code, it would be impossibly difficult to guess what the next authentic code is. And that's a real key. Now, what they did is then you scratch off the code so you see the code, but then you can use SMS text like a phone, cell phone, mobile phone text message to confirm that this is a genuine code. So you scratch it off, you can check the code. But that didn't go far enough because if you found a genuine code, you could just copy that over and over and put it on 1, 10,000, 100,000 packs. What they did, they also started to measure how many times that code had been authenticated. So if you first scratched off a code and then entered it in your phone, you would expect that to have only one time it's been checked by you. And if it's been checked 2, 3, 5, 10, 100,000 times, then you'd believe that there's some suspicious activity. Most likely the product you have is not that 1 out of 100,000 that's genuine. Then again, there would be a way to authenticate it through that serialized codes. Engaging the source economy. I mentioned this about the high amount of generic products are made, legitimate, genuine product made in India and China. And so there's just a lot of capacity there to make medicines. And so those happen to be the largest source economies of counterfeit product, substandard, flowing into Nigeria. And so they did engage the source economies to try to get that product stopped before it even gets sent. So that would be finding it at the ports and the shipping containers, and then those countries to help try to find those counterfeiters. So that was one part of vastly reducing the flow or the easy flow of product in. Increased laws and prosecution. So again, very, very dedicated, daring people that started to address this. And so there were courts and resources and prison space, investigative resources that were applied to this because they did feel like it was a important for all of society and for the economy to keep growing. Authorized distributors and zonal distribution centers. Now, this was another big key. So let's say that you're a retailer there of any kind. You could be a store, you could be in a kiosk, a bazaar. If you're going to some of those rural countries, you might have it in a car or in a cart that you're taking around to sell to people. But every one of for you that are the retailers, that you now would know that the product is supposed to legally go through a zonal distribution center or authorized distributors to get the product. So if you don't get it from one of those zonal distribution centers, it's suspicious. Now, it might still be genuine product just through a different type of broker or reseller, but they know that the product is supposed to be through there. Now, that product then, when it moves into the country, would move into those zonal distribution centers. So they could then start to check, even on the highways, if on the roads, that if product was not coming in, it was coming in and not going to the zonal distribution center, that would be product that was suspicious, and there would then be some more clear enforcement. RFID authentication of the tertiary packaging. Tertiary packaging is the outer packaging. Like it's a case that has 12 cartons in it. So the case itself, the outer packaging, would be tertiary packaging. Then inside that, the cartons themselves would be secondary packaging. And in that would be the 3 sets of blister packs. So what they did on the very outside is they put RFID codes. And the key with this is then, if you received a case of product that you bought a case of product from me, you could authenticate, if you had the equipment, you could authenticate that case did come through the zonal distribution center. It's genuine. Now, you don't know what's in the case yet, but at least you're able to quickly check on the outside. Now, something with RFID, radio frequency identification, is great, is you can do non-line of sight inspection. So if there were 20 cases of product in the back of a truck, you could authenticate all of them at once. You could click the button; could read all of them. So that's the key. Is you know that that product went through. It has the correct label anyway, that it went through the zonal distribution center. Again, you don't know what's in there yet, but this is just one level. Now, if you did search that and you bought 12 cases and only 11 cases had that RFID tag on it, you would then be suspicious of that one case. That's just increasing the visibility in the supply chain. With that is they also realized some of these people were going to be very remote in the country where there might not be cell phone coverage. So these remotes can be operated offline. So if you go to a city, that little handheld device, $20, whatever it was, could get updated, like a software update. So all the authentic codes and things could be updated. You go out and you're offline, you're out of cell coverage. You could still read the products that were in the system. Now, if something got added later, you might not be updated. You might be between updates. But this just helps a lot of the product itself. And authentication, especially in areas that don't have things like internet coverage. Consumer awareness campaigns. This is a real key at the end. In everything that we do is consumers, number one, to know that could be fraudulent and dangerous product in the market. If they have no idea that there's potentially dangerous product, then they may continue very, very risky behaviors. Now, at the same time is that you don't just want to tell people there could be a problem with consumers without giving something that they can do. Some type of action, countermeasure, protection for themselves. So awareness that there are counterfeits out there, but then also that you could do things, and there's features there that can help, such as the scratch off codes and SMS text. And so now consumers, when they would go buy product, would start to be conditioned to scratch off and check, and at least at some level. At this point, it doesn't have to have a very high level of compliance to find out quickly when there's counterfeit product in the market. All these together at this point, it seems very qualitative, there's a lot of things going on, but you don't have a really fundamental way to think about whether it is really complete, whether there might be some big holes in the system that we haven't considered. But they're looking at the space of crime, and they've done a lot of things. So we're going to look next at what those features were, and then how they do fit into the crime triangles, to think about it really as a theory. So from NAFDAC, we received some insights and some of the reports on what they were doing. And in the upper left, you'll see the scratch-off code. So there's a blister pack of product, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe 12 tablets are in there. And you can see, you can scratch that off, and there's a serial number. At that point, you can enter that serial number into a mobile phone, and it would authenticate it. Now, in the future, it could be QR codes and things like that. But at the start, there were these scratch-off codes. On the right, you'll see the handheld RFID reader. So again, that's a not a very expensive, which is key because of average salaries or total revenue of companies. Pretty simple, low cost RFID reader that can operate not when it's connected to Wi-Fi or internet or any connectivity. And in there you'll see what an RFID tag looks like. Basically, that handheld item shoots some energy, some electrons there at the tag. The tag charges up and then responds with whatever code it is. And then at the bottom, you'll see the handheld Raman spectroscopy. So on the right is the device itself. Looks like a Star Trek tricorder. And at the top, you can put in the medicine, or it can read through a bottle. And then you'll get there. In there is loaded a set of the authentic, authorized products in the marketplace. Say the profile of some type of mass spec analysis or something, identification of the product, and then it tells you if it's okay or not, and it records that sample as well. So when they go back, like in the middle, when they get training, and they go back and synchronize it, then some of that fraudulent product and analysis would go into their overall system to increase their data and information across the system. On the left, you'll see there what they can do. And what's real great about this is it is remote, and it's portable, and you can do a lot more tests. So these are just the activities and examples of the devices. So when we look at the case study details, we're looking for a way to have a method to look at the whole problem and then see if there's any gaps that we're missing, and just a way to look at the entire system. So what we've got here overall is the fraud opportunity. It's really called the crime triangle, but in this case we're looking at fraud, maybe not a crime, but we call it the fraud opportunity. And it's based on 3 different factors. One is the victim itself. So that would be the country, that would be the consumer, just how people operate and who they are. Next is the fraudster. And one reason we call it the fraud opportunity, and we use fraudster instead of criminal, is sometimes this is not a violation of a criminal statute. There's still some type of deception, but it's some type of fraud. So we can understand the fraudsters, their motivations, how they act, the networks they work on, but that's really inefficient to address the fraudsters very directly. It's not like there's 10 fraudsters in the whole country, and if you go arrest 8 of them, you're more safe. There's a lot of different types of activities going on there. We can understand them, and it helps us, though, in the side of the triangle that is most effective for us. Guardian and hurdle gaps. This is the place. This is infinitely more efficient to work on helping ourselves be a harder target. So even if there is a criminal that's got counterfeit medicine capabilities, if they go into a market and see all these things going on, they're going to start to think that there's not an opportunity, because they're looking for an easy way to make money. We show them there's a higher risk of getting caught, or the cost of conducting the crime, then this country, the goal is to get the country to be a harder target, not very attractive. At the end, before we finish this, I'll give you some examples of that. But first, to look at what they did. So on the left here, we see number 1, product authentication. So as I mentioned, they have the ability to check a product and authenticate to make sure it is what it's supposed to be. A key is that they know all the products that are approved to be in the country. And that means that they have the profiles, the chemical fingerprints of product, and they can test them. And so that's the bottom line. To start, they know what product is supposed to be there, and they can check it. On the far right here is consumer serialized codes. So with that is in addition to that, is that when a consumer receives a product, they can authenticate that the serialized codes. They can authenticate the product. A key is consumers. These are people as they're receiving product. So let's say that you sold me some anti-malaria medicine because my wife is sick with malaria. And I know you, and you're in my town. You have the local convenience store on the corner. If I check this and find out that it's fake, I'm going back to you. Number 1, it's my wife, and you're not letting me get good medicine for her possibly. Number 2 is I know you, and I will have there'll be a conflict there. So unless you told me you're selling me counterfeit product, but that's not what I want. So real key there is the consumer codes create a conflict between the consumer and that last seller. So we have ability to get into that place where there's that conflict there. Now, when the seller knows that a buyer, a customer, can authenticate the product, we're trying to reduce the fraud opportunity of them even wanting to sell it. So if it's a retailer that I know, people I know from town, I went to school with them, I know their family, then they're not going to want to cheat me, and consumer codes will help with that. Let's look at number 3, engage source economies. So Thomas Jefferson from way back said no vice was ever solved from the supply side. That is very true, because as long as there's product, a lot of that vice there, that there's an opportunity for it to be consumed. So one of the keys was that the engage the source economies, that product, the vast majority of the production in the world of generics from India and China is their capacity, and that's also then where a lot of the counterfeits would be then produced based on that excess capacity or capacity. They also, from the analysis, they found out that that's where the product was coming from. So Nigerian customs and the NAFDAC worked with the customs in those countries to try to even stop the product from shipping in. Next, support and strengthen enforcement. So nothing works if there's not strong law enforcement and prosecution. And then that was something that was reinforced from the start. Again, the problem was so bad that there was definitely economic stagnation. It was causing a lack of growth, a hindrance to growth in the entire economy, and that's bad for everybody. So they did have resources there, and they've continued to support those. Regulate the supply chain. So here's products comes in the market, and by them having these zonal distribution centers, so product is, when it's imported, it's supposed to go to these official warehouses, and from there, it then gets disseminated more locally through brokers, distributors, transporters, or whoever. But the key is that product coming in. They know it's coming in. They know where it's supposed to be coming from. So if you're buying product, you know what's going on there. So they've got transparency since product's moving through there. 6, retailer product authentication. That was those RFID tags on the cases of product. And there's cartons in there, and then there's the blister packs further inside there. So when a retailer receives a case, they could do a quick check on that. Now, again, that's not 100% secure, but it's pretty darn secure. And if anything, it increases the cost of conducting the crime. Someone that is going to commit that fraud would have to then duplicate or somehow get fraudulent codes into the general system. Because what happens here is that when that code is read, the device itself will record where it was and what code was read. Now, when it goes back and it's synced up to the overall system, it will identify that and share that information. If there's a single code that's been duplicated, again, 2, 3, 5, 10, 100, 100,000 times, that when that's read in the marketplace, it will record in the system. That just gives more information, makes the supply chain tighter. And finally, the most important final step is consumer awareness. So consumers know that there's a problem in the marketplace. A lot of consumers know that people that have been made ill, or at least not improved, by counterfeit medicines. So there's an awareness of that, but not only an awareness of that it's out there and prevalent, but what they can do about it. And they specifically know about those serialized codes. Now, when we look at Nigeria over time, since writing this article, we had a colleague that did a lot of work in Sudan and a neighboring country in Sudan. And one thing that they found was that the anti-counterfeiting activities in Nigeria was getting so strong that counterfeit product was leaking to neighboring countries. So, and again, Nigeria, that counterfeit opportunity went way down. And so, Nigeria needs to protect itself, but then to share some of the best practices for the bulk products in neighboring countries. Another factor when they were looking at it and monitoring over time, the fraud opportunity continued to change. When entire shipping containers weren't able to get across the border and get into the country, or go to Cameroon and driven across the border, there was a shift to smaller packages, such as parcel. So even to send through the mail of some kind to ship cases in. Or what they found is all of a sudden at the airport that people were flying in and out of one of the international cities in a day with massive packages. And then they started to open them up and look at them, and they found that people were coming in the country with many cases of product. And they tested them and found that they were counterfeit product. So along the way is that there was a shift of the supply of product in. And so the thought was then, well, what can we do to try to, we're moving to the next level. And what's next? So all of a sudden watching for people that are in and out of the country in the same day or overnight, but also those packages themselves, having X-ray, even if it's a computer system to look at the X-rays, they could read what's in those cartons and the incoming goods, which they would do for security reasons. But now they can expand that to look for these boxes of medicines. And if they find the medicines, they could look at it. Along the way, all those activities made it more costly and risky to import and sell counterfeit medicines in Nigeria. Now, does it still occur? Absolutely. But The key is that they've made it more and more difficult for the counterfeiters. And like I said, my colleague, anecdotally found that there was more of the bulk products, the less uh, uh, um, um, high quality, higher print packaging products were leaking to neighboring countries. So Nigeria has done a lot, and the fraud opportunity, the crime triangle, is a great way to look at and consider countermeasures and control systems. So as we do our 10-year review, 2022, looking at this 10 years later, over time it's been interesting to look at Nigeria and say, okay, that's just interesting in and of itself. But really for action is for us to look at how do we use this. And it's one thing to know about that activity. It's another to know how we would implement this in a new situation for a new product or in a new country or region. So theories to apply. To step back, first we've got quality management and risk management. So basically the theory is you're trying to identify the unacceptable level of activity and then implement processes to identify and reduce those root causes. Again, quality management, 101, the basics. Risk management, 101. So that's just the foundation of our thought process. Next is situational crime prevention. So once we realize we're going to try to reduce the opportunity, make a country or a system a harder target, we then look at the first theory to look at is here trying to understand and modify the place of crime to reduce the occurrence. By place of crime, we mean just where that fraud occurs. When we think about crime, we sometimes, if you think about a murder, it happened in a room with a hammer. There's a body on the floor. When we look at things like international commerce like this, the place of crime is the entire supply chain, and it could be across multiple countries and thousands of miles. But we look at the place because we want to reduce the opportunities. We want to understand that. And we look at situational crime prevention helps us think that way. It's a combination of routine activities theory and rational choice theory. So meaning that a lot of criminals find their chance for crime in their day-to-day activities. They walk by your house and one day they see the front door open and a bag of money indoors, right inside the door. In their routine activities, walking down the street, they then would see that. That's not someone walking through my neighborhood because they wouldn't see that bag of money. And also rational choice theory, that the criminal thinks that they're making a rational choice. They think they're going to get away with it and make money. So we look at the space of crime and try to think about there's probably people that are doing the same things over and over again. So we might be even able to communicate to them. If they know that these countermeasures are in place, then they might get caught. We can then intentionally communicate to the fraudsters that they might get caught. And rational choice. So we're trying to identify, we realize that when we communicate in a certain way that people in that area, up and down the street, people will know if maybe you put a sign in front of your house that says dog inside the house and video camera tied to police CCTV. All of a sudden then, if that information is shared, even during that routine activity, you will then reduce or eliminate the motivated offender. And that's a key. If there's no motivated offender, nothing happens. Now, even the most protected systems could still get hacked or get robbed if there's a really motivated or desperate offender. But the key is we want to let them know that your house, anyway, has a dog inside and video cameras that they will probably get caught. Now, that's rational choice theory to increase that belief. Now, really what you'd like to do is look at prevention, look all the way around the crime triangle, and close your front door, and don't put that bag of money where it can be seen. So all of a sudden, then, you do multiple things when you look at the space of crime. You look at outside and detection, but you also reduce that target for them. That's situational crime prevention. Supply chain mapping. So again, it's one thing if you walk into a room and there's a dead body and there's a hammer there, then you've got a murder scene. But we need to understand everything that's going on. So like Nigeria did is look at where that product's coming from. What's the type of package style? So it was in big shipping containers coming from predominantly India and China. And then now they see the supply chain map. They can look at where most of the flow occurs. And that was a real key to understand the ways the product flows through links and nodes. Next is hotspot analysis. So now that you know, you're thinking about prevention, we've got these big picture theories, and we know the supply chain. We now look at to examine where in the supply chain that there's a system weakness that enables the fraud act to occur. So just because someone's walking down your street, if your door's open, if your front door is open and a bag of money's there, then then, and if there's a crime, then a hot spot is them walking in your house right there. So a key is if we look at that as a system weakness, that the door is open and the bag of money's there, then you could look at modifying both situations. One is you could put the money away, or you could close the front door, or you could do both. At that point, the cost, now number one, that would be very quick and inexpensive. Simple, quick, and inexpensive. So you might as well do both. Put the bag of money in the closet and close the front door. So you would look at those two hot spots. You could reduce them immediately. That's a real key, is looking at efficient. What's the most efficient way that we can respond to them? That's hotspot analysis. So you do that over the supply chain maps. Action research paradigm. So a real key is that you don't just want to look at it and leave. You want to look at it and be a part of the process and look at what's next. Actually, in our Nigeria report, we had not only those 7 things, we had, I think it was 5 or 7 more things that they could do or should do. So the question wouldn't be, since things are under control, what do you reduce? The question is, what more should they do? And so action research paradigm is to implement the most efficient and effective risk treatments that could be, countermeasures, control systems, something, then include researchers to monitor and refine the process. So you get in and do it, but you build in the system to constantly monitor. If you're working with theorists on this, or analysts, or investigators, you want everybody to come together and realize we're looking to quickly go from phase 1 to phase 2, or version 1 to version 2. And so you're constantly looking at refining the system, because number one, maybe you just didn't clearly understand what's actually happening. So maybe the fraudsters are still acting a certain way. You try something, you adjust, but also you have to expect that the fraudsters are going to adjust and they're going to innovate. So you're going to constantly have to look at what's changing and then adjust what you're doing. That doesn't mean you have to spend a lot of effort. Let's say that you just closed your front door and put the bag of money away. Well, you didn't lock it. So later we find out that now the bad guys are walking around checking doors that are unlocked. Well, now we've defined one more aspect of that hotspot. Not only should the door be closed, it should be locked. What kind of lock should there be on there? A bigger lock. But if you just lock the front door but leave the back door open, if they can see the bag of money, they might just walk around back and walk in. Or if you close the back door but you leave your windows open, and they can just climb in the window right next to the front door. That's a key action research paradigm, is us getting in and looking at it and constantly looking for and expecting those changes. And then a product fraud prevention strategy. So at the end is to have a real plan here, not just to do it once, but to have, you might look at it once a quarter or once a month, but you have a management system to review the assessments and risk treatments, to create, implement, and manage the control of a specific problem. So let's say that you look at something, you realize, well, getting robbed is not a big deal, but let's monitor it. So next year you'd look at police reports or something to see if anybody else has been robbed in the neighborhood. All of a sudden, if robberies go up, then you might say, well, our risk is going up. Let's go ahead and do something. That's a real key. A prevention strategy would be you looking at entire systems and defining whether you should do something or not right now, but also what's the review process in the future. Again, is it annually, quarterly, monthly, weekly? All those kind of things. Those are the theories to apply. Next is process steps. So what do? Now that you decide you want to apply those theories. First is hazard identification. This is ISO 31000 Risk Management 101, the introduction to risk management. Hazard identification. You want to know what your problem is. Define the scope of work and include a legal or regulatory violation. Most likely, you aren't solving every single problem of your entire country at once. You might be looking at smuggling, you might be looking at tax avoidance, you might be looking at public health threats, you might be looking at rogue product getting into legitimate supply chain. Whatever it is, define your scope of work before you get started, because again, you don't want to just start gathering data information and thinking about responses. Define the product. Specifically, this would be a hot product. So when we look at hot spots, it's really hot products and hot spots. So what is it you're looking at? Now, you could look at the entire amount of product shipped into a country. Let's say all the medicines shipped into a country. But it's really most efficient to narrow that down. So it doesn't necessarily need to be statistically the most dangerous or the biggest volume, whatever. Just pick a specific product to look at, especially to look at the process of applying this. So you look at the bigger scope of work. Let's say the regulation is just counterfeit product, illegal counterfeit product entering a country. And next is a hot product itself. Let's look at I don't know, pick whatever, cholesterol medicine. And you then look at that specifically. Now, with that, next you'd look at gather reports of incidents or suspicious behavior. You may have some reports. There may be news articles. There may be releases from universities checking things. And it might be reports of actual incidents, or it might just be suspicious behavior. You want to capture both of those. And if you look at like the 4x4 analysis, or is it 3x5x2 or whatever it is for intelligence analysis, you're identifying suspicious behavior. So you want to gather your own reports, and the more direct the problem and the more direct to you, the harder the data is for that, the more actionable it is. So if you have on your desk a list of 5 counterfeit products that made people ill in the hospital in town last week, and you've got samples of them, that's the highest level of information you have. But you still want to consider the suspicious behavior. And over time, you want to keep analyzing this, looking for more, so we see what might be happening. Define the violation: public health, economic, tax avoidance, regulatory, whatever. There's no right answer here except for what you're accountable for. So let's say that you're accountable for tax avoidance, smuggling, for avoiding taxes. That's your focus. You just define that as your focus. Now, other people that are working and looking at public health or economic impact of sales versus companies in the marketplace, that's other important work, but that's not in your scope. It's really important to narrow. Define possible success measures. Now, I say define possible. At this point, you're starting to try to figure out how would we measure success. You're not deciding on it. You're just thinking of a number of ways that you would be addressing this. Later, you'd look at the specific measures that you would really commit to. Now, one is results or incidents. So let's say like food safety in a country like the U.S. So yes, there is a measure and a review and testing of foodborne illnesses in the marketplace, people getting actually sick. But that's an actual measure, yes, but that's not what we're trying to really do. We're trying to prevent it. So really what we're looking at before that, that's still something that we look at, the results, but we really want to measure preventative actions. That could be like FDA inspections of companies for their food safety practices. That could be looking at control charts of the temperature variation in an oven, kill steps, handling procedures, things like that. That's prevention. That's quality management. So we want to just look at these different ways we could measure success. I think like for an enforcement agency is really tough because in the past it's been all product you seized. So if you let product to the country and we're better at seizing it, your numbers would look great. You look really successful, but then it's not prevention. Now, if you think about like Nigeria working with those source economies, there's a lot less, exponentially less product shipping through ports. So next year, if they're good, then if they're really good at their job at prevention, then next year there's just not going to be that much product going through the ports. So their seizures will naturally go low. We're still looking at the seizures, but we have to recalibrate to know that that's not the best metric. What would be the best metric is to look at maybe those activities, maybe a Nigerian customs worker that's working in India, that's working in China, that's looking at implementing systems, control systems. If let's say it's like your house again, that if you have someone that monitors your house and they see that the CCTV is working at the front door and the back door, they check that your doors are closed and locked. They check that your windows are locked and no bags of money are seen within the window. And they check once a month. That is so much more valuable than looking at who's walking down the street, because you're analyzing what it is, those key factors that lead you to be vulnerable. You're monitoring those. And when you see that monthly, the boring old task of that person walking around and checking the doors and checking the list that your windows aren't open, that is the most efficient way for a home, a country, a company, anybody to operate. But you have to identify what are those big preventive controls, and then monitor the controls and systems are in place. But we're just thinking about that at this point. Conduct supply chain mapping. So what nodes and links for the product flow? So where does the product actually flow? We're not looking at who organized it, who was the mastermind. We're looking at the physical product itself to see where it's moving through. We just want to know physically, analytically where it is, and lay it out in a map. We know exactly then where it is. At that point, then you looked at script analysis. Now, I didn't mention this before because it's part of the rest of the activities. Now we look at the fraudster. So if you're able to figure out or guess, how did someone enter the counterfeit market? So sometimes they might move from one counterfeit product to another. So they might move from counterfeiting alcohol and spirits, and all of a sudden say, hey, we're shipping some product in, illegal product in. Why don't you put some counterfeits on the truck? It could be food to then spirits. But then if you're a food vendor, then you wouldn't have as much of a fraud opportunity. Your script, the process that you follow, would not be really there for counterfeit medicines. So we're trying to look at, to understand the decisions and actions of the criminal. How did they figure out this was a good opportunity? How did they move the product? What did they need to do to enable that product to flow? Combine those to just understand, because part of this is understanding how we communicate with them, of how we can persuade them that there's a good chance that they would get caught, and also be able to catch them. That's what then leads to conduct hotspot analysis. So you've done the supply chain mapping, you understand how kind of fraudsters are working, but we really combine the information of incident, map, and script to identify the physical points where there are system weaknesses that enable the problem to occur. So horse meat in beef, that upon receipt of bulk beef, most companies didn't check for species. They checked for food safety. They checked for quality, like the amount of muscle content, things like that. They checked for weight, excess water, things like that, but they didn't check for species. So in that whole horse meat supply chain, the food supply chain, the hot spot, the system weakness was that there weren't very many, if any, species tests. Now that they know specifically by hazard identification, supply chain mapping, script analysis, they know that horse meat in beef or other substitution of products like species is a potential problem. They can do just a few tests every once in a while to vastly reduce their fraud opportunity, especially if they're buying from the same suppliers. If they just do a few detection tests, that will actually deter any temptation even to conduct that fraud act. So we look at hotspot analysis to see where the most efficient interactions are. The key is efficient. Then the product fraud prevention strategy. So overall, this is the way that you monitor everything and to create, implement, and manage the process. And some things that you consider there are: implement the most efficient and effective, start with the simplest and quickest risk treatments. So again, for your house, you don't need to hire an armed guard first. At the very start is you really ought to put that bag of money in a closet. But close the front door, close the back door, lock those doors, lock your windows. Like for your house right now, let's say that you left the house and you think you left the front door unlocked. You don't know exactly how much more risk you have specifically, but you know you are more vulnerable since your front door is unlocked. So how much you could drive home and lock it. That takes time and things. You could probably call, does a neighbor have a key? Is there someone at home? You could call and ask them to lock the door. So today, right now, a very, very simple and quick response, not worrying who's in the street, anything else of buying a new door, you could lock the door. Now tomorrow, before you leave the house, you might make a note for yourself or a reminder that you're going to lock the front door. And if you confirm it, then you're implementing a method, and you're monitoring that as well. That's simple and quick. And a lot of times there are some, when you look at deep at the supply chain map, the script analysis and hotspot analysis, you sometimes find some very, very simple and quick first steps. Then consider the entire space of crime, all sides of the crime triangle and the stakeholders. So along the way is you might be protecting, say you work for a retailer, you might be protecting it from a corporate security side, but all of a sudden sales might be doing some things that are kind of crazy. They might be selling really discounted product into some type of brokers for export or something. That's almost like a source economy. You look at how the incidents are occurring. How did that product get back in the market? And maybe that product for export is not as controlled as everybody realizes. So you want to consider that entire space of crime, all the place where it occurs, and with all the stakeholders. And then continue to monitor the adaptation of the fraudster versus the risk treatments. We need to assume that there's a shelf life on these treatments. There's a shelf life on anything secret. The bad guys are going to figure stuff out, and they're also going to evolve. And that's a real key that we need to build into the process, that we're going to have to review it. It shouldn't be a surprise to say, oh no, we got to look at that again. I thought that project was done. It is not done. You need to have a monitoring process in there to adjust. Now, if you do adjust, then things like Russia entering Ukraine, there's different fraud opportunities. We did a project at day 7 of Russia entering Ukraine, and we considered fraud. And one type of fraud could be for one of the biggest products that's exported from that region, both in Ukraine and Russia, is sunflower oil. So we don't have any risk analysis yet of we don't even know incidents have occurred yet. 7 days in. So, but you could still say the vulnerability in the world has changed, absolutely. And so one thing the thought is short waiting product. So you buy 10,000 gallons, they ship you 9,000 gallons. So one thing companies could do right away is to confirm the volume, confirm the weight of the trucks. Another is dilution. They could put a lower grade oil in if they're trying to keep the sunflower oil and dilute it. If they think it's going to be more valuable if the price is going up, they're going to want to dilute it. So all of a sudden, are there authenticity tests? And most likely there's some type of authenticity or quality check on that product that's being done now. So when we know the vulnerability changed, a key would just be to increase those activities. So you want to continue and to adapt. Now along the way, if you do that back a year ago or a year before Ukraine Russia entered Ukraine, then you'd have these plans in place. Anybody that's looking for a fraud opportunity, routine activities, they're in the oil business. Rational choice that they think you're going to get away with it. If you're doing all these detailed checks, quality control early on, then they're going to think that you're a harder target. They're going to think that there's a chance of you getting caught. That's what we want to do. We want to find simple ways to respond very quickly. So you're not a year later all of a sudden finding fraudulent product across the marketplace, either for your country or for your product if you're a company. You want to put those plans in place so fraudsters don't even try to hit it. And again, how much time did that take to think about it? Now you have to be proactive, yes, but you get ahead of it like that, and you're avoiding so many of those really, really resource intensive problems, and you're heading them off but long before they're even thought of to be considered a fraud opportunity. So finally, how to start. So we've got this theory, we've got the process, but boy, this is really challenging sometimes. So what I would say at the very beginning is define the scope, and I'd say initial scope. It can and should evolve over time. So you're going to find some new things. Maybe you're looking at cholesterol medicine, and you can then combine that with some other type of medicine, right? Anti-malarial or something. Maybe they follow the same supply chains. You want to look at that initial scope. Review the current knowledge. And this is a literature search and a review of previous works, but with a focus on identifying other experts and possible partners. So whatever you're doing in this area, specifically if it's counterfeit medicines, a lot of other people have been studying this and working on it. So you want to build on what they've done, like Nigeria. You want to understand what they've done there, those work processes, how they looked at it. Why not contact them? They're public officials. They'd be pretty easy to find on LinkedIn or whatever. The World Health Organization websites. At least monitor what they're doing so you're not reinventing the wheel. You want to understand what's been done before and learn from them before you even get started. Define the scope too. So you define the scope in general overall. You did a bit of a literature search. Review again of what you're looking at. Now you might have learned something like applying the crime triangle, like this process here. Hopefully some of you have found this because we're helping with the situation, the process that you do that supply chain mapping, script analysis, and hotspot analysis. That doesn't have to be very formal, but it's really just to get started. And then implement the process. So you now define those process steps that we talked about. Again, define the incident, supply chain mapping, script analysis, hotspot. Again, you don't have to go very deep at the start. Do kind of a quick pass. Look over it quickly, maybe even by yourself. I've done that before where I've done it by myself and then I've added a few people. We've added more people and more people later. Just to see what's going on and get a big picture. Define the scope 3. Keep going back to that. So always build in these process checks. You're moving forward, you're implementing things. What did we learn? What would we change? What would we learn? What would we change? And keep going. And that's the way to start. So with that, I'll say conclusion, and I'm very happy to talk to anybody about this. You can find more of our work at foodfraudprevention.com. Again, I'm Dr. John Spink. Thank you for your time.